welcome to this episode of Oral History of Automation of Evidence Synthesis. This is one of the two series that we started to document the methodological, technological, and business developments in our field in conversation with the leaders and pioneers. We are documenting the past, present, and the futures for all generations of evidence synthesizers or systematic reviewers. Our guests today are Keith and Kevin Kallmes, the founders of Nested Knowledge. Keith and Kevin, hello and welcome. Thank you for accepting my invitation for this interview, and please tell us your story specifically before the Nested Knowledge.
Thanks so much for the invite, Farhad. So Kevin and I are serial entrepreneurs. We've never actually had corporate jobs. Started our first company when I was a senior in college doing boutique contract research. So basically manual systematic review, specifically in the neurovascular field. Our father is a stroke and aneurysm physician at Mayo. He was retiring from an editorial board, wanted to stay sort of involved in publishing. And so we started a consultancy called Superior Medical with him. We ran that for several years. It's actually still around. We were then presented with an opportunity when he and a colleague of his did a systematic review in stroke therapy and found a massive gap, again, using the literature, decided to develop a product to fill that gap, a balloon guide catheter for stroke treatment. Kevin wrote an SBIR grant that was then funded by the NIH. And as a direct result, our father and Dr. Willie Brindjikji, his co-founder, basically said, "Hey, Kevin, you wrote the grant. Do you want to execute it on it?" So he ended up as the CEO of Marblehead Medical, and I ended up as the only other full-time employee. We ran that for about 4 years before we sold out to a major strategic. We brought 2 devices to market, 2 510(k) clearances, ran and designed a clinical study, again, based on literature. And that sort of all presaged the unmet needs we were seeing in the life sciences world for evidence synthesis.
And I think I can jump in and say that's really where the dual background, both in a research consultancy, helping design clinical trials, helping to write protocols, you often do a systematic review. And I was managing 15 or more systematic reviews at once across my team in Microsoft Excel. And I just assumed that I was so far behind the standard that all the PhD researchers out there must be ahead of our practices. And then, of course, I took over as CEO of a device company and started working with groups like that run clinical trials, and they were doing things the same way that I was doing it previously. And so I sort of saw it from the researcher perspective and then also from the company perspective, what is needed in terms of evidence synthesis, and also, of course, what is the, let's say, the gold standard practice as of around 2018. And seeing that major gap, I said, maybe we should step back from doing specific devices and doing just one by one SLRs, and we should try to set a standard for what is the software that can support the best practices in systematic review all the way from search through to your final outputs. Because my practice was I go to PubMed, I search for things, I pull them into an Excel sheet, I screen, I extract data within that fully manually, and then my output is going to be just a manually written Word document after that. And that does not seem like scientific systems should be replicable. They should be something you can practice over and over again. And of course, they should be as rapid as possible. We also saw that systematic reviews in general take something on the order of $140,000 of labor and 18 months, which is simply not acceptable for a lot of the decisions that you're trying to make in everything from clinical practice to company level decision making. So all of that inspired and brought together the concept for nested knowledge.
So so you saw a need, there was a gap, you got the idea. From the idea to the launch, how did it happen? How did it go?
So I'm lucky enough to be very good friends from college with a statistician developer named Carl Holub, who's now our co-founder. And Kevin happened to be in Boston, where Carl was working at the time, and had a napkin sketch at a bar.
Quite literally a napkin sketch discussion. Yes.
It's kind of a cliche. Oh, you're at a bar, you sketch it out on a napkin, but Kevin and Carl actually did that. And I was traveling with another friend of ours who knew how to code in Germany, named Steven. And we just kind of had this conversation like this should exist. Someone ought to build this. Um, and so we did, right? The four of us then met and decided to start a company.
Keith says, and so we did. I should note that that was basically parallel conversations in like the summer of 2018. By early 2019, all of us had committed to work on nested knowledge rather than our previous engagements, and we worked for almost 3 years just to build out what I noted earlier, best practices in systematic review, all the way through from search through to outputs. So we were very much focused on process. We of course understand that there are lots of other ways to assist with the systematic review process or outputs, but we recognized that in a scientific practice, you really need to have that foundation first. And so we were very patient. We started with, every single step in the systematic review process, breaking it down, mapping it out, and getting it into the software before we even went to market.
That's fantastic news. I've heard that in Boston, when you're ordering a drink, they serve it with a napkin and a pen.
San Francisco too.
So there are at least 4 web-based applications with automated record search retrieval that makes them good choices for the living evidence synthesis and even creating living evidence maps. Nested Knowledge is the newest one and one of these 4. And it is getting records from Directory of Open Access Journals, from PubMed, and ClinicalTrials.gov. May I ask why you are not considering using OpenAlex or preprint servers?
That's a great question, and we are very open to bringing in other types of evidence. In fact, we recently, just in the past couple of weeks, added an integration with the OpenFDA API to pull in reports of adverse events, because obviously when you're doing a literature review, you may want to pull in additional evidence that is not technically from an indexed publication. But we're talking about systematic review here, so we want to be very careful about what we offer in terms of systematic search methods. And so preprints, I think they're extremely valuable. And of course, we launched into the COVID pandemic, right? So we recognize that preprints sort of became where all of the important evidence lived. But we want to maintain effectively as high of standards of data that's coming in as possible. And so we've really focused on those indexes that offer the sorts of publications that you would want in a final systematic review. Very often, you put in a preprint and then the actual publication comes out. If you set up a systematic search through nested knowledge for that topic, you're going to effectively just be pulling in that evidence through that search from a different source the moment it's published. You can upload. We basically, for all that, I'm saying like we have very strict standards on what sort of published evidence comes in, but we do open it up so that if you want to work around those standards for our direct API integrations, it's very straightforward to run those searches, pull a bibliographic file. You can even get a spreadsheet of the metadata from those records and just upload that into nested knowledge, and it will work. So we tried to go for flexibility much more than having integrations with everything. All of our API-based integrations are to try to support that systematic review workflow. And if you're going to evidence that is not as typical, and this goes far beyond preprints, like people have brought in FDA discussion transcripts, insurer reports on drugs. You can bring in very creative source types and extract from them in nested knowledge. We just recognize that if we're going to support all these flexible methods, we might not want to just do it one by one with APIs. We want to just build out a flexible system for you to bring in whatever evidence you want.
That is a great thought, actually, because that is the case, and many people are interested in different. And how about connection to the subscription-based databases that we have access through the university, like the Ovid Medline, Ovid Embase? Have you thought about that?
We would love APIs with Embase. They haven't given us one yet.
If you want to put in a request,
Yeah.
we would love to have that. We know that you want to have multiple databases in your search, and often Ovid and Embase are what researchers go to. Obviously, the current method is run your search on Embase, pull in the RIS file, bring in the metadata, and then take your review from there. But it's so much easier if it's an API than if you have to do it yourself.
I accept. So how about the priority screening and let's say, the progress graph? Do you have sort of facilities in place to support priority screening and showing people that how many screened, how many include, when they could decide to stop?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a feature within the activity page. There's a product project management application within the software where you can go and track what your colleagues have screened. You can also use Robot Screener either as a replacement for a human or, like you said, for prioritizing the more likely to include records. You can also bulk screen, basically use an AI to categorize your research with tagging and then bulk apply screening exclusion reasons. For instance, we can automatically tell you the population intervention comparators outcomes, study type, study size, and uh, uh, study location. So if any of those are an exclusion criteria, you can apply all those at once to all records that fit that description.
Even to drill down a little more on how intensive we are with that piece. In our activity page, you can track your CAPA score against your co-reviewers. So if you wanted to have, if you, Keith, and I were screening together, you'd be able to see where you and I disagreed, where Keith and you disagreed, and then where Keith and I also disagreed. So very intensive tracking, just really to help you identify, oh, it looks like we are consistently disagreeing for the same reason. Why don't we go and adjudicate those conflicts and then also change our screening to make sure that we're in line with each other? So very intensively, we try to make collaboration and recognition of, where are we disagreeing or where are we not following the same protocol easy to do. And then I think this is probably going to continue to be part of this discussion, but we also think in terms of AI assistance and speed. And as Keith said, if you wanted to go to the other end of like let's say there's a spectrum from as automated as possible to as curated as possible. If you and I are doing reviewer level screening with independent adjudication by Keith, that is sort of the gold standard, right? Dual screening with adjudication is the gold standard for a systematic review. But we've more and more noticed that if you're trying to do a rapid review, you may want to do AI-based screening, and that's where the PICOS-based or location-based screening that Keith mentioned, or screening just using our robot screener to give you a decision, that can be a practice in a TLR or in a rapid review that saves you 90+% of the time of your screening. Once you've identified what you're looking for, you can go back through and again screen records in bulk based on AI recommendations or AI extractions.
Absolutely. It makes sense. And to be honest, Prisma 2020 has implemented the automation feature in place. So it means that we could actually use the automation tools, even though people are not using it that much. But I think if you implement it in the program, they will be using it. The reason that they don't use, they have no idea what it is. But as soon as it becomes a creature in front of them and helping them, they would use that. And there are a few papers published about the safe procedure to when to stop and the stopping rules. I don't think there is an agreement when to stop, that 95%. But I think we are going to find a way, a pragmatic way. I usually tell people that if you think that the graph goes flat and you want to stop, rather than stopping, switch from two people to one person and continue it. If you don't identify anything, you've saved one person. But if there is a new record, you could always switch back to two people. So there is, I think, methodological and theoretical part into it as well. It's going to take a bit of time to get the acceptance of the users, but it will be there, hopefully. And I'm sure if you have users, they are going to use it.
We're patient, and when we originally launched Robot Screener way back in 2021, it was around when we launched the tool for use. And you're right, at that time, most people would just do manual screening. And so even though there's an AI there that can learn from every single record that you're screening and then apply a decision for you, people were not using it. And I think it was a little bit, they weren't sure what journals would say, and they weren't sure what bodies that would be consuming this information would accept. And so there's sort of this separate question. Are the tools available? And that's what we focus on, right? We're tool builders. We're not trying to set the standards for systematic review. We're trying to give you ways to follow them, but that are as rapid as possible. But we're still listening very carefully to the marketplace and then also to regulatory bodies and other bodies that would sort of set the standards here. This summer, we were very pleased to see that NICE from the NHS put out a position statement on AI where they said that machine learning for either ranking or for applying decisions to underlying studies would be acceptable in health technology assessment submissions. So that was a major change from the not that it was not allowed, more that it was uncertain, right? And whenever you're uncertain, you're gonna defer to the most traditional and the most curated method. But since that statement, I think that people have jumped in a lot more, and I don't want to underestimate how much people are already just using AI for these tasks. We have several million decisions that have been completed in nested knowledge with the robot screener assistance. We have a validation study that was performed on 20 very diverse review types where the AI identified correctly 97% of included records, and humans actually identified fewer. So in terms of acceptability, I think we're now at the point where you could treat it as not that you close your eyes and trust the AI for any decision, but where you treat the AI as at least a co-reviewer for adjudication. And I think it is all about, again, marketplace acceptance from the bodies that would be the ultimate consumers of this data, but then also, of course, validation of the AI that you're actually using.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And to be honest, UK NICE has always been pragmatic compared to
Yes.
the Cochrane. Cochrane was so perfectionist, but now I think they are getting closer to each other,
Yes.
and they are both becoming pragmatic. So I think the users, when they see that the lead organizations are actually using these technologies, they are more likely to use it as well. And inside your program, you have two features that are probably not relevant to each other, but I'm going to ask them in the same question: adaptive smart tags and Bibliomine. How do they work?
So I'll take those in reverse order. Bibliomine was a feature we built when we saw our users manually adding individual references from reviews that they were attempting to update. So a lot of the times there's a pre-existing publication from, let's say, 2020 that did a great job. It just needs to be updated. So what we had researchers doing was going to the bibliography, copying out the DOIs or PMIDs into the
Oh,
manual
done then.
conditions on nested knowledge. And we just said, hey, a machine can do that. So at this point, you can just upload a record. The nested knowledge system will go in and automatically pull all the references from that record. So you can basically say, I want to update this publication. And then you could even bulk apply screening reasons to that. If it came from that Bibliomine publication, then you can include it. So it's just there to save time on a process we saw a lot of systematic reviewers doing manually.
I think you can also treat it as a sanity check. So you can either treat it as, hey, there's a great review out there, I'm going to update it. And you could really treat that as a starting point that is much more concrete than your own search strategy, right? If you're finding thousands of records and they've already drilled down and they said, hey, we had your same inclusion criteria and we found 25 RCTs and here they are. That's incredibly helpful. But you could also treat it as, I have my search and I want to do a sanity check against what other researchers found. And you can add as many systematic reviews as you want, bibliomine them, and you can even see the crossover between what your search found and what theirs found. So effectively treat it as you can turn your review into a review of all reviews via bibliomine.
I'll start the question or the answer to the adaptive smart tags by just talking about tagging in general. The biggest reason that folks switch out of legacy tools, the most common being Excel, into nested knowledge is tagging. We take a very different approach to data extraction, evidence extraction, study classification than other tools on the market by using hierarchical taxonomies of evidence. And this is actually the way science works. If you think about the way we classify organisms in the Linnaean system, it is a hierarchy. It is a hierarchy of related species, obviously all within the tree of life. Similarly, within a systematic review, there's multiple layers of evidence that you're going to want to classify or extract. And nested underneath those top layers of what is your intervention, let's just say you're doing a cancer review, you're going to have many different types of interventions. You'll have targeted therapies, you'll have chemotherapies, and within those, you're going to have different types of chemotherapies, different types of combination therapies. And by building out this hierarchical taxonomy, you're actually able to reflect the relationship between all of those different tags. I actually often see people attempting to do this in Excel, where they'll have a header and then subheaders, but that is an aesthetic attempt to do what nested knowledge does inherently. So that's tagging as a background for what adaptive smart tags is. Adaptive smart tags is essentially a way for the AI to suggest or extract evidence from underlying records, either abstracts or full texts, that correspond to your hierarchy. So just going back to our cancer example, let's say you had enzalutamide as
a therapy.
and you had overall survival as your outcome of interest. You can specify within your hierarchy, I want to know the dose, dosing schedule, and overall survival for enzalutamide and competitors, and have an AI extract that with quite high fidelity into a table for you, or highlight the text for where that evidence occurs. And if you're doing a systematic review, you can have it as a suggestion, which you then go quality control. Or if you're doing a targeted review, a rapid review, you can just say, hey, extract this for me. I want to see a table.
Keith does this commonly when he's showing the software to people. It used to be that we would train them trainings used to take a lot more time when we didn't have so many AI tools, because it's like, okay, let's go in and screen some studies together. Now, when you get to the extraction phase, you can build out your key questions. As Keith said, if your key questions are, show me enzalutamide overall survival, you simply make those tags, you make sure they're in context of your sort of intervention hierarchy, of your outcome hierarchy, and then the AI can give you those recommendations or extractions pretty much immediately. So that is the transformation that ASTs have brought to us. And I do want to really highlight, we talked about AI acceptability for screening. What about AI acceptability for extraction? That's where we really feel like you have to have a system that can be fully human in the loop. So you have to have a system where if the AI recommends that you extract a certain overall survival statistic within a study for enzalutamide, you are able to go in and curate that, and you have a system for tracking what you have seen and what only the AI has seen. And luckily for us, we'd started from process, right? Keith has a saying that he constantly brings up, that AI will sell tickets, but good processes win games. So what you really want to do is you want to come in, you want to build out your key questions, you want to have the AI extract them, but then you want to go through the best scientific practices in a process that will allow you to curate that and have a confidence in your final systematic review. So that's really what tagging does, and ASTs are really the central and most important AI for extracting exactly what you've designed into your review.
I've heard that the gold rush made many millionaires. Majority of them were selling shovels and blue jeans. So that is the thing. AI itself is just a rush, but you need to have the tool in place and the processes.
Yeah, I've always loved that analogy of Levi selling jeans, and of us going out and trying to sell systematic review shovels. I will note that in the AI space, there's also sort of the second question of like, I think the biggest question in AI is trust. And so, can I trust GPT? Can I just go into GPT native, type in my question, and get a review out of it? Absolutely not. Systematic review depends on having traceable searches that give you a set of candidate records, having full PRISMA tracking of studies that are coming in. You have to replicate each of those processes. So maybe not in every case in scientific research, but certainly in systematic review, you need the AI to fit into a scientific process. There's no question on that piece. So that's where we feel like specialization is really important there, where we have an AI specifically for extracting references from underlying systematic reviews. We have an AI specifically for screening, an AI specifically for tagging. I think that is how you have to take this on, because if you try to say, hey, we have SLR AGI, right? That's not really what the field is looking for. The field wants traceability and transparency and following the scientific practices much more than they want, a quick, hypey answer to a question.
Absolutely. I mean, you definitely know what you are doing, and you know the rules of the game. And it comes to the informing the users about the limitations of technology as well. I occasionally write blog posts when I face a problem, and I realize that during the screening, for example, AI assistant is not good if you don't have abstract. If your record is coming from as RIS from ClinicalTrials.gov, it will have only title, for example. If your record is completely in Chinese, title and abstract are in Chinese, you get records from CINAHL. CINAHL has multiple languages. So, and then when it comes to data extraction also, there are some limitations, and it comes with when the data is separate across multiple reports of this study, and there is appendix as well. And then even finding the same data, there might be that you see standard and mean in the text as something, and then you go to the figure, it is different, or in the appendixes. So there are conflicts, the way that have been reported. So these are the limitations. How your system is going to face these limitations.
So I actually use this as somewhat of a metric when I'm talking to people. I use it as an assessment of how much systematic review experience do they have? Do they bring up related reports? We have spent as much time building out systems to manage the situation where there's one study that is published in multiple publications as we have the adaptive smart tags, right? So AI extraction is very helpful within those studies, but then you get to the point where you have 5 publications, you have the initial report, you have 5-year follow-up, you have 10-year follow-up, all of those publications are out there, and you need to bring together all their evidence and make sure you're not extracting them as if they are independent studies. And so we do have automatic matching by NCT code. So if something is a clinical trial, you can come in and you can basically find those NCT codes in underlying studies and match them all together in our related reports management tool. Otherwise, it is still a manual process because obviously we are dependent on authors, right? All systematic review is dependent on the upstream authors. If they do not have an NCT code because it's not a system, it's not a clinical trial, or if they're not clear on the fact that it is a secondary publication, you need to go in and manually say, hey, publication 2 is attached to publication 1. If you do that, we have a system where you get to see all of the extracted data for a study despite how many reports it came from, right? That is built in. So I can tag an underlying study in the initial report, in the 5-year report, and then you'll see all that data together. And if there are conflicts, right, if one of them has different overall survival than the other, you can pick which one you're going to report as the final. That does, again, that's where discretion comes in, right? There's no replacement for discretion in assessing conflicting data. And so again, that's my metric where if people come in and they say, hey, can I click button and get an SLR? Then I know that they're relatively inexperienced. And if people come in and say, okay, I see you have this AI SLR tool, but can it do related reports? Then I know that they've done a lot of systematic reviews themselves and they're trying to solve the problems that are coming up in their daily lives.
And how about the screening? So yesterday, I think it was yesterday, there was a workshop. They've built a system that when the records don't have abstract, it adds them as undecided. So the AI, they don't allow the AI to make a decision on them because without abstract, it's not possible. So what do you do about the records that are not standard journal records?
This is a constant sort of issue that we have to think about, which is how much should we just be flexible to what you bring in, and how much should we just try to totally standardize a process? And just like with search, we don't try to say that in the screening process, all records are automatically undecided. We expect that reviewers may be able to mark that. If abstracts are missing and they should be there, right? That's actually a situation where we can help. We have direct connections into CrossRef, and if you just have a DOI, we can pull in missing abstracts. But if a record has no abstract, like if there's no underlying abstract to be screened, we will still keep that in the queue. We will still have the AI give a recommendation, but very often in those cases, it takes your discretion to note that the title only screening by the AI might be less helpful than the abstract screening because the abstracts have so much more data. And mostly what you're doing when you're doing AI screening, there's a little bit you can do with metadata, but there's a lot more you do with abstract content. So we don't like quarantine abstract-less reviews, but we do have a filter for abstract-less reviews. So if you go into the system, we have this page called Inspector. And again, on the whole topic of AI sells tickets and process wins games, my favorite feature in our entire software is our study inspector, where you can do filtering of your own records. And this has many different applications. As Keith said earlier, you can do bulk actions, right? So you can filter and say, show me studies with enzalutamide and bulk include or bulk exclude them. But you can also go in and quickly filter and say, show me records where the abstract is empty. And then you can go in and assess those quickly, right? So think about it as more of a sniper approach where it's like, I don't want to deal with all of these records. I want to narrow in on just this set. You can do that for bibliographic traits. You can do that by publication date, for instance, or you can do that by the actual contents of the study. And one of those is the abstract missing? You can go to those studies, target them, and either, in many cases, I think that those are the sorts of things that are going to get kicked out. But if there's some that might be includable, you can assess those in a narrower set of records as long as you learn to use Inspector. That said, I will note that this is where that expertise comes in. If you are sort of just doing a across the top of the literature and you're not going deep, you might not jump in and do as much of that curation. But if you are if you are doing that full curation, I feel like that's where good process, good filters, good bulk actions can actually save you tons of time while still having full confidence in what you're putting out there as an output.
Fantastic. And I have seen people facing problem with doing the screening. So we usually tell people, I advise them that before anything, at any stage, do the data cleaning first. So if before screening, get rid of the duplicates. And before the screening, make sure that majority of the records have the title and abstract. If they don't have it, screen the ones that don't have first. Otherwise, it's going to confuse.
Exactly.
And then sometimes they face that they have forgotten to delete some of the duplicates and they are in the systems. Some of the systems they don't have during the screening, you couldn't mark them as duplicate. So they include one of them and exclude the other while both of them should be included. And it confuses the machine because the machine doesn't know if it is relevant or not. So that is one thing I wanted to know if you've got that feature that you could always mark records as duplicate even during the screening. And the second thing you mentioned about API.
Yes.
And I think API is great for ClinicalTrials.gov because there is no way we could manage it as a reference. They are not reference. So people
Yes.
use it EndNote to manage them. That breaks down all the structure, the great structure that they have in there. If API could actually get the records in the same structure into nested knowledge is perfect. Using DOI, there is one tiny thing that I wanted to bring to your attention, and that is when conference abstracts, entire conference abstracts set 200,
Yes.
300 have one DOI. So I usually tell people if you want to use CrossRef API, use the ones that are in PubMed, so they have PMID and DOI rather than just because that is something that could happen.
Fard, I think we've gone beyond my metric for expertise. We're really just getting into the details now. So if people are more like, hey, I want to do a rapid review, listen to the other parts of this. But if you are a systematic reviewer who's diving deep on this stuff, first thing, you noted that you always tell people to remove the duplicates first. The great thing about nested knowledge is you almost don't need to think about duplicates. Run your searches. We have auto-de-duplication. We have a duplicate quarantine where you can see and you can potentially override these. But we've had independent testing of this, and the main question that people had was, hey, many systems deduplicate based on unique identifier. And DOIs are usually a unique identifier, but that's not true in the case of conference abstracts. So can you have a system that has logic built into it to recognize conference abstracts and treat them differently such that DOI is not used as the deduplication mechanism? And the body that asked us about this is actually ICER, so effectively the US HTA body, who was testing our tool before adopting it. And they ran a test of our deduplication and found that it was able to sense conference abstracts because we'd foreseen that same problem that you're bringing up, and we built in logic. This is not AI. This is just good, this is just good logic built into your systems to recognize publication type and then not deduplicate on DOI because it is not truly unique in that case. And they did find that this system was accurate in the deduplication of these difficult record types. You can always override it. So as with everything in the system, if you use the software to do something automatically, you can override. So you can manually mark duplicates and you can manually override the quarantined records. But we do take on those edge cases that you're talking about in our auto-deduplication. And I will say that the last time I looked at the deduplication, the quarantine for anything other than demoing it was years ago. So at this point, I'm not going to say that duplication is a solved problem, but it is certainly the problem that is we're the most confident that you can simply trust the automated system.
That is so exciting. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
this information with the users. Beside the living review compliant PRISMA flow diagram that allows people to actually have multiple updates of the review, you allow users to draft their manuscripts, which is a good move after it breaks the exclusivity of the Cochrane Review Manager because that was
Yes.
almost the only one in the quantitative field that we knew. So what are the facilities of this writing module? Is it just writing like Word document, or there are other features that users should know about?
So my favorite part of this is the automated updatable tabular generation. So if you have a table of outcomes or interventions and you want to build it, this is actually, as Kevin said, how I demo right now to mostly pharma, but often academics. I build a review, build a hierarchy, use the AI to extract data, and then I build a table of that data. in the manuscript. And the reaction I get every time is, oh, it took me 2 weeks to build that table. Are you kidding me? So taking structured data from our database, putting it into a structured table, that's often as much as these reviewers need. If you're just doing a TLR to inform your team or to inform your leadership on the competitive landscape in a space, that's all you need. You can similarly put that into a living dashboard that has a living Excel or maps or histograms or graphics. Where we actually haven't gone is automated drafting. We actually
We get a lot of requests.
We get a lot of requests for it, but right now we can confidently say we extracted this evidence. It's correct. Here's the provenance to the text segment that it corresponds to. We got you the right value. It's much harder to validate. We wrote you a summary of this.
And this is one of those things where I think you have to, and it seems like on this discussion, we are drilling down into the details, so I'll go details here on writing. Methods, I think, are more doable, and we are working in the background right now to make it so that our systems can help you write your methods based on your input. So if you put in your research question, your PICOS, we can help you put that together. But results are different, and especially interpretations and insights are different, where at some point, the most important thing to do in your review is to look at the underlying studies, look at the data you've collected, and have expert judgments on what is important, on what is truly different among, we've all heard the idea of statistically significant but irrelevant. Those sorts of things come up all the time, and we need to be able to address them. Those are not questions that you want a GPT to address for you. You want to interpret your own evidence, because really, if you're going to go and present that evidence to your team or to external bodies or to a journal, it really should be your interpretations at that point. I'm not trying to take it off the table entirely for the future, like, will nested knowledge ever give me any help with writing my results? But I will say that we will be very careful as we enter this field, because, again, NICE, which is very, I think, forward thinking in these areas, said, hey, machine learning to assist with screening is great. Data extraction, right? AI for data extraction is exploratory, but certainly could be used. Writing, they were not as let's just say that they did not say that an AI written HTA would be accepted by them. And I think that's smart. I think that is the right decision, because in the end, your interpretations need to come from expert judgments that are outside, or that take in evidence that is outside of your review, rather than just saying, hey, LLM, I have these 12 studies, I have these 24 data points, please interpret them and give me the most important insights. I don't think that that is the way forward for scientific interpretation.
I think this actually comes down to who our first customers were. So ICER was actually our first user in the health economics space, and that informed our conservatism. EX published a paper on the overlap between the AI abstractions and humans, or published a poster rather. And that's awesome, because you can validate the data that the AI is abstracting. Ultimately, I think the reason NICE is skeptical, the reason we're skeptical, is that's the number one question I get. Can you send me validation data on how well this AI performed? What's the sensitivity and recall of your screening? What's the overlap with human on your AI abstraction of qualitative or quantitative data? I think people will not trust the drafting because they can't get those statistics.
Wow, that is true. But let's stay on the side of on the user side. And I'm a user of these technologies. I'm using any tool that I find. And what I see from the user perspective is that automation is not just about statistics that we get from, let's say, recall and sensitivity and the specificity.
Right.
It is about how they are helping us. And majority of them help us. For example, well, I don't want to name the technologies, but the technologies started emerging 15 years ago. I started using them professionally about 11 years ago. And we were using it. There was no study showing that they are doing a good job. But I was using machine learning since then. And I never trusted it. I go with zero trust all the time, but people will use it. And as they use it, they start finding out the glitches and the problems, and they know what to do. And then they will report it back, and the system improves. And there's evaluations done. I mean, you start with GPT-3, you build a system. Until I do my research and publish it on evaluation of your system compared to other one, already GPT 3.5 is there with less hallucination, with less errors. If I work on that, 0.4 is there, and then the DeepSeek comes along. That there is no study published on DeepSeek. So people ask, okay, we've got like 800 studies on using LLM in systematic reviews. None of them is about DeepSeek. Maybe that one is better. So it is so rapid that I think people should start using and adapting to it without waiting for the research, but knowing the limitations.
I completely agree. But you should hear there's an inherent conservatism in our approach here, where we want to make sure that once when we use LLMs, we could very easily switch. Like we actually did a switch to update to the most up-to-date OpenAI model a couple of months ago, and that did improve performance. And so that sort of thing, we can adopt those rapidly, and users can jump in and find, again, the edge cases where it might be giving you wrong answers pretty quickly. But we still want to stay within that paradigm where as soon as that's available, we should do a validation study. And we have like validation projects, but we have to keep updating them and keep expanding them to make sure that we're covering all project types, we're covering different disease states. But we can quickly do internal validations. And then we encourage our users, when they find those glitches, when they do these tests, go ahead and make a poster or publish those so that they're available. You're right. There might be, like a lag, and that lag may be as long as that certain LLM is being used. So there is that problem where you're constantly, but I mean, that's sort of like living review problems, right? In a living review, you make an interpretation, new studies come out, and by the time you published your article, it's out of date. So we've struggled with these problems in this field for quite a while. And I think that the people who are on the cutting edge can sort of bring others along. So you use the software, you notice where it's doing well, where it's not, you publish a validation article, and then of course, again, it might fall out of date, but you can very quickly turn around, do the same validation on a new model and get it out there. And I will note that when it comes to not the validation side, but the functionality side, right? Like how quickly can a tool keep up and truly offer you like the best available assistance? That's where I think that startups like Nested Knowledge have a major advantage. I recommend you go to our release history. I know that's like most people never look at the release history of a software, but I released a video in December where I went over all of the launches that we had throughout the year of 2024. And we launched over 150 individual features. Some of those were pretty narrow. It was like different ways to present related reports on outputs, right? But some of them were truly a standalone AI feature for adaptive smart tagging. And 150 features launched in a year. I don't think legacy systems are really just keeping up with the velocity that a startup can have when it comes to launching these new tools. Again, we mix that with conservatism, right? We're trying to be conservative about how to reflect the systematic review process, but as either users identify gaps or ways to improve, or as new capabilities emerge, we are very quick to react to those sorts of things. And so we do recognize that does mean that there's always that validation lag, but intrepid users can always get ahead and can always make a name for themselves as the people who are let's say, the validators of systematic review methods.
Thank you for mentioning all the releases that you had and all the functionality that is being added, because some of the studies that I have seen, they are the majority of the actually large language model studies and systematic reviews are focusing on really GPT, cloud, I mean, this sort of, or Llama. And I say that, but those are not systematic review tools. I mean, it is not one size fits all. You cannot just go there and ask for everything and they are going to give it to you. But I tell people that, did you know that actually existing automation tools are using large language models and they have been fit for purpose? So I tell people, don't use the general large language models, use the specific ones that already have been implemented. Because when you are implementing, you consider the best practice, you consider the user's need, you consider this community systematic review. So that is, I think, one of the major things, this recall and sensitivity that you are mentioning. I think when it comes to these tools, it becomes really the speed and the accuracy more than anything else. And those things are for the GPT. I tell people that, I mean, many of them are using, I mean, we go to the restaurant, they bring us a food, and there is a sausage, we eat it. We have no idea what is in it.
Right.
We like it.
Exactly.
And I mean, Professor Gayat, I asked about that and said that if my recommendation for the food is that if it tastes good, go for it. So we go for it because it
Yeah.
is good. Yeah, it is good.
Yeah.
So that's what people say. So that, oh, I love that it does the automatically deduplication. I love that it actually tells me that it probably this one is excluded. So the majority of the users wouldn't care about what they would care in the large language models like GPT, because they know that you've taken care of those aspects already. And
So if I can keep it within your analogy, and just to note, we don't take any money from Chipotle, but I did used to work there, and I was really impressed with their systems, right? It's not just they made good food, it was that they had these systems for making sure that you were eating good food and that you would know what's in it. And when you think about the sort of analogy here, if someone's going to throw a question into GPT and then publish a paper about how great it is at writing systematic reviews, that's sort of like standing up a ghost kitchen, cooking one meal, having people try it, and then shutting down the restaurant. And we are not that. We are we are the people who are trying to put together a system where you can trust that you're going to get high quality food, regardless of who's jumping in and working as grill master, which was my college job. So think about it as if you don't have the systems in place, you are effectively standing up a one-time sausage cooking exercise. Whereas if you put together a system for getting food that you know is going to be made with good ingredients, that you know is going to be prepared in a certain way, then you can actually trust a lot more what you're putting in your mouth, in your analogy.
okay. So you're talking about the Michelin stars automation system. When it comes to the AutoLit, you are supporting searching, screening, data extraction, risk of bias, and I want to
Yes.
focus on the risk of bias tools that actually you support in nested knowledge, and if there are any templates for data extraction of randomized control trials, diagnostic test accuracy, and all of that.
So I think we support pretty much all of the commonly used risk of bias tools. If you come in and you turn on our critical appraisal module, this is where I will note, this is not an automated system. This is not AI critical appraisal. This is systematic critical appraisal. So risk the ROB2, we support also the Robbins I, we support JBI, the Newcastle Ottawa system, the SIGN system. Did I say JBI? Yeah. But all of the ones that are commonly used for clinical evidence, we support as critical appraisal systems in that module. And if you find one that you want to use over and over again, send me an email. I'm the product designer. I can go and add it to our systems if there's one that's commonly used that we're not supporting. We do also support the flexible creation of your own critical appraisal hierarchies in tagging, right? So if you go into our tagging system, it is very flexible, right? As Keith said earlier, the AI can auto extract your location, your PICOS, and so on. But if you want to build out a hierarchy that represents an economic critical appraisal system that's not currently in our formal systems, you can do that. You can build out any system you want, and then you can either have the AI assist you with it, but more importantly, you can go through and assess those studies by your newly customized hierarchy that reflects the critical appraisal system that you're using. And if you go into our systems, go into your tagging page, configuration, and then go to templates. We've actually built out about a dozen templates of more rarely used critical appraisal systems for things like economic studies that you can employ even if they're not part of our formalized systems. And then you can build those out and template them for yourselves.
And it is the same for the data extraction tools, like for the randomized
Exactly.
control trials and.
Yeah. Anything you want to extract, you can build out into a template that you could reuse across similar studies. In some of our templates, one of my templates, I think it's the most used template in the entire software, and it's not even close, is a basic PICOS template, right? Here's how you can structure your data extraction from randomized trials, background characteristics, interventions, outcomes, and other study details, which I built out several years ago. And I think it's been used, like at this point, thousands of times by users who are just coming in and they don't want a blank sheet, right? I always talk about the blank page problem with our developers. It's like, okay, we can create a great system, but if you don't give someone a nugget of what they're going to need to do, it can be very confusing, right? So to try to make it a lot easier, you can come in and instead of building a tagging hierarchy yourself the first time without knowing our systems yet, you can come in, you can just click templates and start from that PICOS template that we've built that can effectively be the seeds of what will be your data extraction tree.
It's great to hear. And I think these templates are going to be very useful for many people who are doing these standard, well-known types of systematic reviews. And you love terminologies. You keep creating these terminologies and you
Yeah.
naming the pieces of the system, like the living room and the bedroom and all of that. And you say one of them is called nest. The other one is study inspector. You already referred to it. What are they and why do you insist on naming them?
So it's more that we recognize that we're doing something a little bit different than what was done before. So actually, Nest was inspired from the early projects that we were doing that also inspired the name Nested Knowledge, which was we were trying to create these living reviews that had nested evidence within them. And that was not a single spreadsheet. It was not even really a single point in time systematic review. And so we wanted a term, even just internally, for identifying a living, interactive, collaborative systematic review with online outputs. And so differentiate that from like a published systematic review. So if we say systematic literature review, we mean a point in time, here are my conclusions, here are my outputs. But what is the underlying database that contains that information? There's not really a word for that, so we called it a nest. So each project is a nest. You can do a systematic literature review within it, publish it, make it available, and then you can turn around and update that nest to get more conclusions in the future. So really, I think that it's not that we're trying to be too inventive with terminology. We are certainly not trying to confuse people around those things. We're trying to give names to things as they emerge as new capabilities. So Nest is a living, interactive database that supports your review.
If I may, it's also reflective of the dynamic nature of a project that you can create nested knowledge. I think for another paradigm, if you're going to do a systematic review, it has to be a systematic review all along. In nested knowledge, we have the flexibility where you can start what is a targeted review or a rapid review or a gap analysis that, because of these sort of bulk manipulations that Kevin's going to talk about in Study Inspector, you can adjust your settings and turn that into a systematic review down the line, as long as you go do the required aspects of a systematic review. Now, what do you call that, right? Is that a targeted into systematic review, right? No, it's a database that's manipulable, that has outputs, a nest.
Yes. And we think it's, well, hopefully other people think it's clever that we are effectively also referring to the hierarchical organization of evidence, right? So we're nesting our interventions, we're nesting doses under, or combination therapies underneath those interventions. So we are sort of referring to the underlying structure of that database. It is a nested hierarchy of evidence. So hopefully there's a little pun that people can hear in there.
Yes.
But then on inspector, we could have called that filterable spreadsheet, right? Like that's effectively like the basic capability, but that doesn't capture all of it, right? Because in addition to filtering, you can also go in and make spot changes and quality control. That's sort of an inspector. Like if you're an inspector, you're going to come in and you're going to view what Keith has collected. You're going to notice that Keith was wrong on a certain inclusion or collected a certain piece of data incorrectly, and you can correct him. So that's really one of the main capabilities in inspector, is to inspect someone's work and override it. So we were trying to be a bit more literal there. But since it's an expansive page, you can map PICOs, right? You can explore topics that are reported in underlying studies. You can do bulk actions. So you can filter and say, show me all studies that are in a certain geography that report a certain intervention, and you can bulk include them, bulk exclude them, bulk collect data within them. All of those capabilities are all in one page, right? So if we called it a word that already existed for that capability, we would be effectively narrowing what we're saying that page can do. Whereas what you can actually do in Inspector is filter, quality control, and make bulk actions, as well as exploring topics. So with all those things that packed into one page, we do feel like we need to name that feature in a way where people can have a term for that new capability that I just don't think existed in Excel. It doesn't exist in other tools. So we need to be inventive. You'll note that we didn't try to reinvent the word screening or reinvent the word critical appraisal. Wherever we're reflecting something that already exists, we're not being inventive. We're simply trying to reflect the process. But hey, whenever you're building new technologies, you're going to have to come up with some new names for things.
Yes, absolutely. I think that nested is because it could be the bird's nest and it could be the nested knowledge, like we have the nested hierarchical information and knowledge. So it's completely understandable in that sense. And the inspector gadget comes to mind, which is completely referring to inspectors. A really nice word. In terms of terminology, critical appraisal, we don't really use critical appraisal in the systematic review context. We usually use risk of bias assessment because so when it comes to the clinic and I find a paper and I want to use it on my patient, then that is when I do critical appraisal. So some people may find it because many get this, there is a reporting quality, there is risk of bias, and then there is critical appraisal. But I think what you've done is fantastic by implementing all these risk of bias templates in the system. I think it's going to save a lot of time for many.
Please come to my next developer meeting. That module was originally named Risk of Bias, and that's what I said. And then we got a bunch of user feedback where they said, some of these systems are more of critical appraisal systems, and that's a more general term for it. And so like we have a system called ROB, which stands for risk of bias. So that also caused confusion. It's like, I'm picking my ROB system. I think I might do ROB. And my team forced that change. So why don't you come and we'll campaign together.
You have no idea how many of the users and clients that I have the same confusion. So I completely understand that the users would comment something like that. I've seen people saying that we want to use PRISMA or we want to use Consort for critical appraisal. I've seen that. And let's go to the synthesis part of the nested knowledge, where you could visualize the qualitative data, very beautiful. And then it's a sunburst, let's say, graph that they could see. And then there is the support for the meta-analysis, network meta-analysis. I wanted to ask how much you support them, and then the assessing the certainty of the evidence using grade, and in case of network meta-analysis, obviously cinema. Do you provide this sort of support for the quantitative analysis?
Multiple parts there. I can jump in. So first of all, for people who haven't heard of synthesis, again, we're not trying to be too inventive with words here, but synthesis to us means showing your combined findings. So our two basic platforms are Auto-Lit, where you complete your review, and there's a lot of those AI tools built in to assist you. And then synthesis is what you can share with others. So for Auto-Lit, you're going to have only your collaborators access that. But synthesis pages you can turn into link shareable, QR code shareable. You can embed them in other web pages. They've been embedded in journals, right? The Radiology Journal published a review and then embedded the synthesis page as a supplementary material. So think of the synthesis page as the publishable or public part of your database. You're not going to let people jump in and change your screening decisions, but you're going to give them a read-only output that contains, as you said, both your qualitative and your quantitative findings. And our sunburst diagram in the qualitative side of things, that just takes your hierarchy and it shows frequencies. It was originally inspired, we didn't invent the sunburst. Actually, Florence Nightingale, when she was originally mapping out adverse events in the field, would use basically an early version of a sunburst diagram to show what soldiers were dying of. And in some of our materials, we show her sunburst, which uses the exact same color of blue that we use as ours. And so that's our most popular visual. People really jump in and they love using that for filtering down and show me the outcomes for this, for a certain disease state, for a certain publication type, certain outcome. All you need to do is click through those and you get to your outputs. So that's the qualitative side of things. Again, we are more building upon what was there before, but you can treat that as let's say it's the only interactive qualitative drill down on hierarchies of evidence in the systematic review world. And synthesis itself, I don't think that other systematic review software tools get you to an interactive online database. Many of them get you to an Excel sheet. So that's where we do try to distinguish ourselves, in that we do give you an environment where others can examine your data without being emailed an attachment. Now, what about NMA? Our quantitative module is actually our own open source fork of the R meta package. So if you're a statistician and you're doing a systematic review, the most common package that you would use, we took that and we basically made it into an open source JavaScript library that we employ ourselves. So all of the same statistics, and people have published validations where they found exactly the same things using R meta that they did using our systems. But what that really allows you to do is have someone who's not code, who doesn't want to code effectively, get an early network meta-analysis. That said, there's always discretion involved here. So we generally frame this as a feasibility NMA, but the moment your data is brought in, you are getting meta-analytical outputs. So if you collect data on a study, and then you go to your synthesis page within your project and you view the network meta-analysis, you'll see that data. And in fact, one of our breakout moments in 2022, Keith and I were at a neurosurgical conference, and there were 3 people on stage, 2 PIs of trials, and then me. And I had a systematic review of basilar artery strokes. They presented a review of basilar artery strokes. Sorry, they presented a primary study, a new clinical trial of basilar artery stroke, and then another new trial of basilar artery stroke. And on stage, I did a live, as in like in the 10 minutes of their presentations, I did a live network meta-analysis of their results and all of the previous results, and showed how those results fit into the context of the field of stroke treatment. And what it was actually amazing is that before those studies, there was some leading evidence that said that thrombectomy might help with basilar artery strokes. But because of those 2 trials, all of a sudden the meta-analytical results became extraordinarily and obviously positive for device treatments of stroke on stage in front of hundreds of neurosurgeons. And so that was a major moment where I don't think that before Nested Knowledge, anyone could have done a meta-analysis on stage in front of people. Like, you imagine that as the most boring audience participation of all time would be, okay, let's watch someone build forest plots. But since the tool does all of those visual building for you, you can get to those effectively the moment your data is in there. And then you asked about also how to. Oh, actually, I'm going to let you repeat your question on NMA.
So you support meta-analysis, network
Yes.
meta-analysis. The last
Yes.
part of the question was about assessing the certainty of evidence using grade or cinema in case of NMA.
So we basically have those built into our hierarchies as noted earlier. So if you go in, I think the second most used template that we have is the BMJ grade checklist. So jump in, that is part of what we offer in the tagging side of things. Grade is obviously extremely commonly used. And then not only can you assess studies on the grade, but you can also filter your NMA by those assessments, right? So it's not even just a feasibility NMA. You can go in and filter to only high quality evidence. You can go in and filter to any of the questions in that grade assessment and say, show me studies that have a blinded allocation in their RCT, right? All of those can be basically filtered to, so that you can not only get one NMA of all evidence, but network meta-analysis live on any subset of your data by concept, or of course by bias level.
So when you refer to the BMJ grade, because we have only one sort of grade, are you referring to the certainty of evidence assessment that we conduct for the comparisons?
Yes.
And then each one of the outcomes?
Yes. Yeah. There's just a publication with like the most recent grade standards that we pulled it from.
Okay, thank you. And that's fantastic. And about the cinema, so for the same thing for the network meta-analysis.
I think that this is where I'd have to say we might need someone to build out that template if you want to add that to our public library, or we could go off after this call and add it. So by the time your listeners are in there, we'll have that.
Perfect. So I'm just getting away from the technological part. I know that, I know that you are implementing the cutting edge technology that comes into the market. You are using AI, Gen AI, you are using rack technology, and you probably have enough safety measures in place. So when it comes to the business, a business like yours, a startup to start, requires funding. How did you raise money and how much? If it is not confidential.
Of course, we've raised over $4 million to date. Much of it was from successful investors from our past company who decided to roll the dice with us again. More recently, it was with a venture capital firm called Teamworthy, who saw what we were doing and actually outreached to us. We didn't necessarily need capital at that exact moment, but we were just really impressed by their understanding of the space. And it's always nice to have dry powder to invest in development, in technology, and sales. So we struggled much less raising money in this company than the first one, I will tell you that.
And then I'll note, as part of that most recent round that was led by Teamworthy, and they're like deep experts on the field. It was founded by the founder of the GLG Expert Network, so they really know their stuff when it comes to medical research. The Research Triangle Institute International participated in that round. So in addition to sort of successful past investors with us, people who have an interest in the actual space also have invested in the company. And we're really excited about those investments because not only does it show that, true experts in the area, once they examine the technology, they know that it has legs, but also that makes for great partnerships. And we try to collaborate very openly with those sorts of groups to try to get out not just good software, but good research. And then I will also note that when it comes to when we think about money in a company like this, we are really trying to get something out there that is the new standard in systematic review methods. And so I think that with that, the pitch is a little different from your normal sort of Silicon Valley pitch. It's like we don't want to go out there and say, "Hey, we're going to scale to $1 billion on following the Facebook playbook" or something like that. We want to build a scientific tool, and we think that if we're patient about it and if we make that available to researchers across all types of institutions, that will be a long-term growth and something that is much more trustworthy and defensible in the long term. But of course, that means that investors have to be patient with systematic review processes much more than they are with sort of like the hype cycles. So when we look at the strategy for investment, we also look to things like NIH grants. We are on our second small business grant from the NIH right now. That is a grant to help automate the meta-analytical extraction within the technology. But that's the other thing that we've looked to, is trying to get non-dilutive funding, because I think that offers two things. It's not only that it funds your business, but it also is a very public way to say, we are going to achieve this goal with this level of accuracy for this scientific process, and then the NIH can fund that, and that can be a very public achievement once we actually launch the features promised.
That's great, and it's good news to hear for a startup that it is possible actually for them to go out, and if they have the right people and the right idea and right tools in place to get the funding. And you keep announcing partnerships. I've seen, I think, 5 or 6 of them at least. What does it mean in business terms to have a partnership? Why do you need it? And what are the benefits of having this partnership?
That's a great question. So the partnerships are overwhelmingly with consulting firms, CROs, like RTI, like Open Health, Envision. We have a paradigm where pharmaceutical companies want living evidence libraries, databases of relevant clinical evidence, but they don't build them themselves. So we are a technology firm. We're not a consulting firm. So we have partners who can populate those databases. And I actually think that this is the future of how evidence synthesis will be done. Rather than thousands of emails with CSV or Excel attachments, you will have the vendor consultant researchers and the pharmaceutical companies operating within one platform, vested knowledge, collaborating in that. And the entire delivery model is going to change. It's like the difference between mailing a letter and collaborating in a Google Doc. The partners are people that we have vetted and trust to populate those databases for our or their pharmaceutical or medical device customers. So not only can they use the software, but they can use it to the level where we're very open about wanting them to deliver that to our pharmaceutical customers.
We are exploring basically what those delivery models could look like at scale. And we've had some amazing case studies where like a group can pull together 10 living libraries. Like say a pharma company comes in and says, we have these therapeutic areas of interest. Can you build a living library where we can see new evidence as it emerges daily, but also see the entire history? And again, as Keith says, we don't have an internal research team. We have an internal development team, and then we support our customers. So if you want to think of a systematic review as a combination of good technology and expert researchers, we need that via partnership. We're not going to be able to build a new RTI, right? That would be 20 years and a lot more funding than we can raise as a startup. So I think that the way forward for good research is collaboration. And that's really the root of all these partnerships.
Fantastic. And one of your recent partnership is with Cite. How does that help living systematic reviews? And does it have something to do with what you call smart citations?
So Cite is a wonderful company. I recommend people go and look at the Cite tool. You can do so very easily from the nested knowledge technology. Every single record that you pull in, we will give you what we call the Cite banner, which will show you citations, total number of citations, those that are contrasting, those that are in agreement with the with the paper you're looking at, and also retractions. So we want to be able to track not only the actual contents of your record, like we want to give you the ability to extract it yourself, but you can also see how that publication has been cited by others, positively, negatively, or just general mentions. That is really important to ensure that you're actually pulling in the latest and greatest and trustworthy evidence, because just because a paper has been published does not mean necessarily that it is. I think this is very similar to critical appraisal or risk of bias. You want to not only have the data from the underlying publications, but you want to ensure that it is unbiased and make sure that it is the evidence that you really want to be part of your systematic review. Without something like cite, we're not citation, like we are in the data, whereas cite is in the metadata, right? So we, rather than try to build out a citation tracking system ourselves, we think it's better to integrate that, give you the cite banner. It's very easy to click in on it. If you have a cite account, you can click on that banner and you can go and use their smart citation directly from the nested knowledge technology. So that is a technological integration, which is different from partnerships around research in our tool. Cite is just another innovator in this space that I think that they're ahead of everyone else on citation tracking, whereas I think we are in the lead for basically systematic review, screening, tagging, and synthesis. So if you combine those two, then you know that you're getting or at least you know more about the evidence that you're getting in those underlying records.
And smart citations.
That is directly linkable through from nested knowledge, as long as you have a cite account, right? You don't want to basically smart citations is going to help you figure out the actual, like, trace the contents down to the specific sources, and then also Cite recently launched an AI that would help you also interpret those. So that's where I think really just go ahead and use, I would recommend anyone who's using nested knowledge also examine getting a cite account so they can use those smart citations directly from our tool as well.
Fantastic. And the users are involved in the development of nested knowledge, obviously. And I've seen that you are using Agile development, so the users vote to the suggestions. Let's say you have a futuristic user and puts a suggestion there and gets one vote. Would that reach to your development team?
So we've gotten feedback from a lot of customers that they really love the tool and they would adopt it, but what really put them over the top and made the decision easy is the support. And I think that means multiple things. That means training, right? So people who want to learn the tool but don't have internal training resources, we offer those. That includes research and building support. Like, you're doing your first review and you want to reach out to us for assistance, you can simply contact us. But it also means development. And I said earlier that we developed 150 features last year. Almost all of those that were not an R&D initiative in AI were customer or user suggestions. And every single suggestion that you put onto our feedback page that you mentioned there, every single one of them is read by the CEO, the CTO, the entire support team, and anyone who's involved in the development. So we really, really do listen to our users carefully. And it's not just voting, right? So I do think that there's some features that we just launched by popular demand. The most popular request, actually, and this shows you how intensive it can get in medical research. The most popular request was to be able to do Boolean filters in Study Inspector. So what does that mean? Basically, I want to construct a search that's a lot like my PubMed search, but within my own database. And so many people asked for that we just turned around and launched it. And it's a really cool feature. It's not, you don't have to sit there typing in and or and not in parentheses. You just click and drag terms and you get a Boolean search in your own inspector. So that is sort of like a by popular acclaim suggestion. But if we see a suggestion that is literally just a lone voice in the wilderness, right? Someone who comes in and says, hey, I noticed that in your software you can't do XYZ, or it would make my life so much easier if. We will immediately listen to that, and we will take that on, not just based on user priorities, but based on our understanding of the value to the tool. So we don't want to restrict it to just, we will listen to the loudest voices or the most common. We want to make sure that we're pulling in any suggestion that might help the technology. And so I say, look at that page, look at the feedback page, and look at the release page, and you will see how many of those were driven directly from customer suggestions and good listening.
That's great. I always value the technologies and automation tools that listen to the users. And you mentioned the Boolean logic. 2 weeks ago, I was in Lincoln, and the Lincoln is the city that George Boole was born and lived there. And when you exit the train station, they have a statue of him teaching 2 kids mathematics. And then they have this board that they are explaining that what he did, the Boolean logic. So yeah,
Amazing.
yes, fantastic. If you visit England, definitely visit Lincoln. It's one of the lovely cities. So going to the costing model that you have, um, you know that many people in low and middle income countries cannot afford to pay. There are 350 million people in the world that are living under economic sanctions. They cannot pay, even if they want, they cannot pay. So how do you handle that? And is there a way to have a free access to nested knowledge? And if I want to get subscription for myself or my team, how much is going to cost?
Yeah, so we absolutely offer low and middle income country discounts. Please just email support@nestedknowledge.com and we'll be happy to apply that. Your first project is always free. So yes, there is a free version of Nested Knowledge. Go create an account, run a project. For pricing of other applications, it depends on what your purpose is. Are you a pharmaceutical company that wants to build out evidence repositories of every single molecule that you have? That will probably require enterprise because we have a team of health economists who are going to come in either with a partner or our own health economists help you implement. So that'll be an enterprise level endeavor. If you're an academic, we have very, very affordable academic pricing. So it depends on who you are and what your purpose is. But yes, there is a free nest that you can make. And if you are in that situation where you can't pay, definitely email support@nested-knowledge.com and we'll discuss it.
So is there any public costing model, or is it just tailored based on?
It's entirely public. You can go to Google Nested Knowledge pricing. The enterprise is $695 per seat per month. Business is $295 per seat per month, and academic is $20 a month. So very much priced for affordability. We are children of an academic neurointerventionalist. So we love and appreciate the work that academics do, and we know that the resourcing is not the same as in the industry.
And on the ELMIC point, during the COVID pandemic, I actually led several ELMIC groups in publishing COVID research. One of those publications won an award from the journal for being the highest cited paper of that year. That was a systematic review of antivirals for COVID. I've taught in several ELMIC like workshops on how to use the technology. And as part of that, we have often offered our academic discount is already very high, but we offer an ELMIC discount even above that academic discount. So if you are from a country or if you're just in an economic situation where you cannot afford nested knowledge, that is where you contact us and we will make sure you get in there. We want to support scientists no matter what.
Great. You try to stay on the right side of the history. So
Your best.
yes, you two have led one of the most successful automation programs in the field, and there should be definitely many lessons that you have learned. I would request you that if it is possible to share the greatest lessons that you have learned during this process and during your career for the young generation, please.
Pick smart friends, luck out with smart family members, and then work with them.
Oh, Keith, let's be more generalizable. Let me give a lesson. So lessons on entrepreneurship, lessons on building technologies, and then also I think on the AI side. So for entrepreneurs, I sort of fell accidentally into entrepreneurship because my brother asked me to. So that was, again, you can say pick good family members, but I don't think that's going to be as helpful. But the first thing we did, and this was something we learned, we participated in a Mayo Clinic launchpad. That they taught us a lot of the basics. And so it is important if you're going to be an entrepreneur to learn the basics of like corporate structure and how to raise money and all those things. But the most important lesson is not that. It is about early listening to customers. And this is a process that we call customer discovery. That's where you don't go out there and you pitch your great idea. Like don't walk into a doctor's office and say, hey, I have the best systematic review software since sliced bread. Instead, go in and be a good listener. Right? Just like our feedback page where users tell us what their thoughts are, before you've even built a technology, go to the people who are already doing systematic reviews, in our case, and ask them about their problems, right? Be their technology therapist. That is going to give you so much free advice from experts. And so early in our process, again, we took more than 2 years to go from napkin sketch to launch. A lot of that was going out and talking to experts without telling them our idea, just listening to their pains. And that's a process called customer discovery. There are great YouTube videos on the process. But if you're an entrepreneur, look up customer discovery and jump in on that as your earliest action. Don't patent your idea as the first action. Don't go out and raise, $10 million. Do customer discovery. It costs only your time. And it not only gives you a sense of what users need, but it also gives you a potential customer in the future, right? You don't have a technology to sell them yet, but you can make contact with them, have them in your network, and have them advise on what you'll eventually build. So that's my advice to young entrepreneurs. Go out and customer discover before you spend a lot of money on your idea. It will pay you back in major dividends. On the technology side, Keith and I want to admit that you said that we lead one of the most successful automation initiatives in systematic review. We really do think about it actually as we are a small part of that process, because we are not the technical ones, and we're also not truly there are systematic review experts who are feeding us those concepts. I think that there is an idea in sort of technological development and AI that what you're trying to do is you're trying to build the machine that can fix any problem, right? You're trying to build something that can do whatever a user might ask. I've heard about a lot of tools where people are promising that my systematic review AI can also do your RWE study, can also do your pharmacovigilance, can also basically an undefined tool that can do many things. I think that entrepreneurship and technology development is about picking one problem, picking one incredibly important problem and having total focus on it. So instead of trying to solve every problem for researchers, we're trying to solve the systematic review and meta-analysis problem for researchers. So that total focus has allowed us to limit down what we need to build, right? If we wanted to build something that would be everything to a researcher, it would take us generations. But if we want to solve this one specific subset, then we can start to actually map out what are all the current scientific processes. How can those actually be linked up within a single software? So you're no longer going to PubMed and then Excel and then R and then Word. That really does help you focus in. And when we think about agile methods, that is sort of that's a structure that's applied to your ideas. So if you bring an idea that is incredibly undefined or that has 5 different problems you're trying to solve, you won't be helped by an agile methodology. You have put yourself into a tough situation with your initial choices. Whereas if you take that total focus and say, here are the edges of what we will allow. And I want to just credit our co-founder, Carl, for being maybe the most principled person we know in terms of saying no to things that might be a good feature idea, but that's out of scope. Right. So he's our CTO. I'd say that when it comes to development, very often I'm coming to him and I'm saying, users really want this, Carl. And then he says, no, but it's because that is outside of the scope of what something like Nested Knowledge should be doing. So we shouldn't try to make it so that you can branch into any task you might do. We need to give people this narrowed but complete tool. So that's my advice for technological development is be principled, be a zealot for your specific single problem. And then I have one last piece of advice on the research front, which is, and I know that I'm going to be preaching to the choir on this one, but I think it's all about getting involved early, especially if you're a young researcher. We've worked with so many medical students. There's basically I think there's a gap in medical education, in PharmD education and in PhD education, where it's just assumed that you know research methods, right? Like how many people end up being able to take a systematic review class? I've seen a couple, I've guest lectured in some of them, but most of the time, people who are asked to do systematic reviews, there's no class in systematic review technology for them to take, or no class in systematic review methods. And so I think in that case, it's really important early in your career. So I'm talking in college or in your graduate degree or in your first project you ever do. Jump in and use the online resources to learn these things rapidly. I have an online, totally free course on systematic review methods that is as basic as can be. It's 6 lectures, 20 minutes long, right? Just to try to get people the basics, because I've sort of recognized that as a young researcher, you don't have a lab that you can get a bunch of funding for and then get your name out there into the literature from. But we do actually have the capability to look at what others have done and become an expert by synthesizing what they did. In fact, I think many PhDs, the most important thing you do is you synthesize everything that everyone said before in your field. And we have a case study published on this where a med student named now Dr. Hassan Kobesi published over 20 systematic reviews on neurointervention as a med student, right? So he's still coming through. He hasn't even picked a specialty, but he's already becoming an expert on this area just because he puts in that extra work to learn those methods and then to publish on what he's finding. And of course, he's collaborating. Like he's not trying to do this alone. Like he's not sort of shutting out the world and saying, I'm going to become the expert. No, no, the opposite. He's being very humble, going to experts in the field, getting their advice on design, and then he's willing to put in the work. So if you're a young researcher and you're looking to get your name out there, if you're looking to become an expert in something, probably the best way to get your first step, not every step to become an expert, but the first step to become an expert is see what's been done before. And being the first author on the systematic review in a field at least gives you that basis where you might not have new ideas, but you at least understand what everyone else has done.
Absolutely helpful lessons. And Keith, I want to give you a chance to, if there are any lessons that you would like to share.
Don't be afraid of sales. I would say that the best perspective I brought to Kevin and Carl, who are both smarter, more technically gifted, is human relationships are actually the most important part of any entrepreneurial venture. And I think that like highly technical, really intelligent people in college massively undervalue that and just get way into the weeds on mastering a specific field when maybe knowing the person who leads that field is going to be way more useful in the future for your endeavor. So don't be afraid of sales. Don't be afraid of networking. Don't be afraid of making lasting human relationships because I have a mentor named Tony who told me like deals get done based on with whom you would like to go to dinner, right? That is ultimately how the decisions are made. And that probably makes a lot of highly technical people angry. Like, this is objectively the best solution. And it's like, people are people. And there's a reason that most highly important decisions at conferences are not made at the actual conferences. They're made at the hotel bar after the conference, right? Because people are people.
I'll admit it. I had to be argued around. I wanted to stay in a basement typing numbers into a spreadsheet for my job, but I think Keith's right that even when it comes to the research task itself, it's all about your relationships because otherwise you are that hermit alone trying to be an expert without connections.
Wow. I think people are going to love these advices. And so this is one of the questions I ask everyone, and there is no limitation the number of people that you could introduce. Who should I interview next?
There's a woman named Evelyn Rizzo, who, if you want to interview the superest of users and also like just a massive methods expert on HTA grade SLR, incorporating responsibly AI automations, she's the person to talk to. She's an entrepreneur, researcher,
Founder of Mobility
founder of
HEOR.
Mobility HEOR. She has been doing this for years and really knows her stuff.
You know, I actually think that there's so many directions to go here. Keith's talking about like leading researchers. If we want to talk about sort of the most connected people in the field. So if we take Keith's advice and think about not just technology but people, I think that Dr. Dave Thompson, he's been an advisor to us, and I don't think I've ever met someone who has more knowledge and connections in health technology assessment. I think he's a luminary of ISPOR, and would be a very interesting person to ask about the transitions in the field. He's been in it. I think he got his PhD. I'm not going to tell you when he got his PhD. He would be embarrassed. But he's been an expert for too long in the field, and I think he could tell you about the evolution from like before these systems even existed, before AI for SLR came onto the stage, and really tell you about the evolution to get to this point. So if you wanted, I know that you are sort of focused on history and present and future. I think Dave can actually comment on all of those because he has such a deep history with this, but he's kept on top of it and he continues to be, I'd say, one of the leading voices in HTA. Do we have any other suggestions there?
Quality over quantity, I guess.
I have one more suggestion, and this is based on and this might be a group interview, but I just want to speak highly of our collaborators at RTI and say that there are multiple researchers there. I have it's really hard to say a specific name, but their entire health services team is very well practiced in nested knowledge. But more than that, they're basically some of the most trusted researchers in systematic review by governments, by pharma companies, by academics. And if you really wanted to get the perspective of, again, you said that Keith and I are leading one of the better automation efforts in the systematic review space. Again, we don't want to say that we are then truly the systematic review experts. We're just good listeners who found a gap, who found a problem to solve. And those are the sorts of experts that I would go to if I had questions about systematic review. Probably, I'd say the most under-recognized voice within the RTI system for how technology can change an organization, how technology can assist with systematic review would be Eugene Fairley. He has tons of experience across all of this. He was the implementation lead at RTI rolling out the technology. And I think you must know how hard it is to change over systems across hundreds of experienced researchers. That might be a conversation where you can have a lot of empathy and where he can bring forward a lot of that sausage or those methods that were used to make it and make everyone confident that it's good to eat.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with the people who are listening to or watching this and we haven't discussed during the interview?
And it is very straightforward, and it is effectively in the past, I've noticed that there's always an adoption burden with new tools. And it's not just this, we've talked a lot about trust and we've talked a lot about oversight, but I think that one of the keys there is not trust, but it's early learnings. So as you're jumping into a new tool, the cognitive burden is so much higher than just whatever methods you've used in the past. And just a plug, and this might be a little bit shameless, but it's really what I do all day. I would recommend that if anyone is concerned as they're adopting a new technology, especially for something as complicated as systematic review, and you are wondering, well, how long will it take me to learn nested knowledge? I think that we have had our most recent revolution here, and it is a tool we call Smart Search. We sort of recognize that users don't want to come in and spend a lot of time doing early configuration tasks before they even jump in. So now when you go into nested knowledge and you create a project, we will take you to a search page. On that page, I want you to click Smart Search and type in your research question. And I want you to go from there. I don't think you need me to tell you what to do because you will have an AI that will help you build out your search strategy, that will guide you through the process of building out Boolean operators, and that will get you to your first search strategy. And once you have a search strategy, you're off and running, right? Like then we're just jumping straight into screening underlying records. So I don't think we need to worry nearly as much as we did in the past about, as a user, am I going to have to spend 10 hours learning this before I get value? You're going to be getting value in your first couple of clicks. So if I shorten it, go into nested knowledge. It's completely free to create your first project. And if you want to try out Smart Search, get a pilot with us and run forward with an AI drafted search.
I'll just say thanks, Farhad, for documenting this kind of stuff. I think it's pretty cool if you look back where we were, and I don't just mean we, I mean like the whole evidence synthesis field 5 years ago versus now. It's pretty cool how much has changed. And I bet in 5 years it's going to be almost unrecognizable. I'm talking order of magnitude more data, faster turnaround. So I think you'll be able to go back into your archive and just look at the interviews you're doing with people and look at the tools that you evaluated and look at the projects that you did, and you'll be able to map, oh my God, in 10 years, we went from manual to totally systematic and responsibly automated. So
Yeah.
I guess that's our thanks to you.
Oh, thank you. It's very kind. But the thing is that because I've been in the middle of this, I started with floppy disks when I entered the university. And now I don't have any CDs or floppy disks around at all. Everything is either on the cloud. If there is a second backup, I have it in hard disk. But when I came to the UK, I started a job that was full-time, and we were using a desktop-based system we called Meerkat for creating study-based registers. So the idea was to extract the PICO information from studies and link the reports to the study. So, and I think it was a year and a half after I worked with that system, I went to my line manager and said that make me part-time because I've now cleaned this data and it is so good that I could do my job in 2.5 days rather than 5 days. So I could apply for another job. And he looked at me and said that this is the right person that I found. In that 2.5 days, do a PhD on the data set that you've built. And I did that for the remaining of my days. And I thought that when I was leaving my job, I said that I'm 100% sure that in next 5 years, and that was 2020, we are going to have a system that is going to completely replace me. You won't need people like me because AI will be there. You just need someone who wants to do a systematic review. Go there and do the systematic review. And now I see that this is happening. And this is thanks to the brightest mind. And I told people that I'm happy to lose my job, to even live on a street. But I know that my parents, my friends who have conditions, healthcare conditions, are going to receive the best treatment based on the best available evidence. I'm happy to lose my job. And many people are afraid of that. That's why there is this resistance to adopt these technologies. So Kevin and Keith, you have been very generous with your time and knowledge, and on behalf of the evidence synthesis community, we would like to thank you sincerely and wish you and your team at Nested Knowledge all the best. We hope to speak to you soon again. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.